Welcome everyone again to the Azure Management Talk series. I am Samir, and in this series we are talking to Azure MVPs and community champions, and we are asking them all about the Azure management. Talking about all Azure management. Today we have Billy York from Microsoft, who is going to talk about going from zero to hero for Azure Resource Graph. This is quite a demo heavy content, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Billy, anytime you're ready, you can start.
All right, thanks for the introduction. Like I said, I'm Billy York. I work for Microsoft. You can check out my blog at Cloud SMA and follow me on Twitter at SC Automation. And this is Azure Resource Graph Zero to Hero. So first, a little bit of overview of what Azure Resource Graph is for anybody that's not familiar with Azure Resource Graph. It's a completely free service within Azure. It supports multi-subscription and cross-subscription queries, as well as Azure Lighthouse. So if you're an MSP or CSP and you have those client subscriptions, you can use Lighthouse to query against all of your customer subscriptions up to 100 at a time. And you can kind of think of it as a built-in inventory system for your Azure environment. Azure Resource Graph powers the portal search bar. So even if you've never used Azure Resource Graph Explorer, you've technically used Azure Resource Graph because it powers that search bar as well as the all resources experience. And then something that's in preview, it also powers is the change history. So you can track changes if someone makes a change on your Azure resources. Resource Graph is providing that level of detail. Resource Graph is a very fast and powerful tool. It can query lots of resources. It can do very complex queries. We can query by tag. We can query by name, subscription. We can query by type. We can do joins, and we can get all of our resource properties that are available in their current state and more. And if any of that sounds familiar, it's using Kusto. Like a lot of Azure services are using Kusto now. It's using a subset, so we don't get the full, Kusto experience. The main limitations is you can't use let, if you're familiar with using let and like log analytics to write a small query and then use that query within a broader query. You can only do 3 joins. And then evaluate and its operators are not available. If you followed my blog or me on Twitter, evaluate is one of my favorite things in log analytics. Unfortunately, it is not available in Resource Graph. How Resource Graph works is it regularly scans ARM for changes, and then it imports that into its internal database. They also schedule changes. So like if a new service is changing something or coming out, they get a change notification over to Resource Graph, and then they automatically scan that new service. It uses the non-preview, the latest non-preview API for each resource. It gathers those properties and values from the API and updates it. Because Azure Resource Graph is a free service, you need to be aware of throttling. I've never run into it very often, maybe a handful of times. So if you do run into it though, there's 2 properties you can check. User quota remaining will check how much quota you have remaining, and then user quota reset after will check when your quota will reset. To get the full benefit of Resource Graph, you should have a proper RBAC set up in your subscription because you need reader access to any subscription or resources you wish to query. If you don't have that reader level access, those resources simply won't show up for you. As you may know, in Azure, everything's a resource. So if we take a VM and we think about it logically, a single VM can have multiple disks, it can have multiple NICs, it can have a public IP on one of those NICs. Each disk and NIC is a separate resource in ARM, and thus different types in Azure Resource Graph. With some exceptions, until recently there was no AKS provider in Azure Resource Graph. They've recently put that in. And then similarly, Sentinel and Security Center are not resources. Once you start digging in to Resource Graph, you'll notice these little quirks like that, but you also get a much better understanding of how Azure works under the hood. And per my usual style, that's basically all my slides, and we've got demos. All of these demos and queries are on my GitHub repo, so don't worry about writing them down or copying them. They're all up there, and I'll share those links when we finish with the demos. So, like I said, whoops, wrong one. Here we go. All right, so like I said, everything is a resource, and those resources have types, and then under those resources in Azure Resource Graph, we have tables. And initially, there was just the resources table. So you could just not declare a table initially. Why is this taking so long? Seriously. Wow, it looks like it froze. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Let's try this again. And it looks like we might be having some sort of problem. I don't know. Let me restart my browser. Well, this is going to be a very boring demo if I can't demo anything. I don't know what the problem is. All of these were working. Let me try a different query. Yeah. So I guess I'll do this without querying anything since it's not working. I don't understand. So initially we didn't have to declare a table, right? So you could run where type and then put your type in there, and it'll just query automatically against the resources table over here. But now they've added a bunch more tables, and I'd consider it a better practice to always declare a table. And so you can declare resources at the top, and then do just like in log analytics pipe where type, and then put your type in. And then to see all the types that we have within Azure Resource Graph, we can do distinct type. And this is really going to suck if I can't. There, hey, it worked. Awesome. So Now you can see all of the types that are available in your Azure subscriptions. And you can see I'm querying across 30 subscriptions here. And the thing to note about this is these are the original Azure providers as from when the Azure service launched. And so what happens is sometimes those services get renamed. I'll pick on Log Analytics since it's been renamed several times. This is your Log Analytics provider. It's Operational Insights / Workspaces. And there's a few other because we rename things. It happens. So you can come over here and do formatted results, and it will tell you exactly what that service is at the moment. So with that, you can declare different types. Apparently, it just doesn't want to query the virtual machines one. I don't know why I did that. Cancel. So where were we? All right, I won't query virtual machines again. So hopefully this will work. This query will get us our Operational Insights workspaces, aka Log Analytics, and then Microsoft.insights / components is our App Insights workspaces. And if we turn on formatted results again, it shows which one is which. And then I did have we have these other tables. So this one will query all active alerts in Azure Monitor. This is a fairly new table, I think last 6 months to a year. And this one gets all active alerts from Azure Monitor. Those are now surfaced in Azure Resource Graph, which is really handy because now you can query them from PowerShell with the search AZ query under the AZ Resource Graph module. And you can also put them in workbooks and query them directly from Azure Resource Graph in Azure Monitor workbooks. And it doesn't look like it wants to let me query that either. What if I refresh and query? Anyway, I was moving on to the next one, which is dynamic types. When you query an Azure Resource Graph, you get a certain level of objects back. You get the type, the name, the kind, you get your subscription, all of that stuff. But a lot of the properties of your service are in this properties field. And when you expand the see details over here on the right, there's all these property fields and values that are actually quite valuable that you can query and get from, but you have to know how to get at them from a dynamic type. And so with dynamic types, some of the operators that you want to know are nvexpand. ToLower and toString are really handy when you want to join two different tables together. I found in my experience querying, like joining on the resource IDs, sometimes in one table the resource ID is like camel case, and then in the other table it's not camel case. And so Kusto will consider those two different objects unless you do ToLower. And then toString is also handy because you can't join dynamic types together. So if you need to join, one of these types from properties, it comes out as a dynamic type. So you need to cast it to a string. In Log Analytics and Parse JSON, or Log Analytics to dynamic and Parse JSON are very handy for dynamic types. We don't need them here because it's already a dynamic type when it comes out of properties. So like if we wanted to get the SKU of our app service plans, we can do properties.SKU in there and just cast it out to its own field called SKU. And to see that in the properties field, it's right here, properties skew. To do the same thing, we can actually get the state of our app service plans, not app service plans, our app services. And we scroll over here to the right, and you can see they're running. So essentially, we can go as deep as we want in that properties field. And I am not going to query this because I don't want it to screw up again. But we can query into there as many levels deep as it will let us until you see brackets. Once you see brackets, hold on one second, get lost. Once you see brackets, you know that you'll need to use MV expand. And I have some examples on here I have some markdown. Thankfully I saved it. So if we get our application gateways, and we look in here, there is a ton of values in this application gateways. But if you look right here, you get a bracket. And when you get that bracket, you can no longer just use dot notation into the properties field. It treats it more like an array. So we could do, dot bracket 0 dot bracket, and that will get us this field in such a manner that we can now drill into it. But the better way to do it is to use MV expand. And MV expand, you'll notice it did the exact same thing. It just put it in its own field. And so now we can see this in front end config, and now I can drill in and get any of these properties that I want. So if we wanted to get the public IP address ID for our front end gateways, we can now drill into that field with, oh, that doesn't like that. We can now drill into it, its properties again, public IP address, and then the ID. What did I do wrong? Let's see. So it's properties. Oh, I missed the front end IP config. Hold on one second. Let's add that. And that should solve that problem. Nope. Oh, it needs to go back one. What am I missing? I had all this saved and Resource Graph lost it. I had all these queries set up there. It actually told me that my queries was too long when I tried to save it, so I had to break them out. Let's try this one more time. If not, I'll move on. Properties, front end configurations, properties, public IP address. That should work. Get rid of the ID. I'll fix that query in my markdown. Go back to, let's start with some practical examples, although some of them were virtual machine, so I don't know if I'll be able to show the virtual machine ones. But if we want to get like all our resources by type, we can just do summarize count and then by type. And that gives us a count of all of our different resources. And then if we wanted to expand that to type and location, we could just add the location field. And then that breaks it down by type and location with the count. And then if, let's say we wanted to start getting properties like the SQL license is very important to know. Like if you're saving money with that SQL license, you want to know that it's applied to your SQL databases. And so we can expand properties and do license type. And then that will tell us which databases we've included the license on. So this one, I'm hesitant to run it. This one will get our count by VM size, drilling into the properties hardware profile, and then getting the VM size property. I'm feeling gamey. Let's run it. Let's see. Yay, it works. So then it breaks it down by size, right? So this is very important information. So you can say, well, you know, we've got DS1s out here, we've got D2s, you know, we have a bunch of B2s, which are saving us money. You can see we have, you know, over 700 of this one, you know, and then you can evaluate whether you need to downsize those or whatnot. We can then also get the VM state. It has that in here under properties, extended, instant view, power state, display status. Like I said, we can go as far as we want in that properties field as long as we don't have those brackets. And so you can see we have 792 VMs running versus 26 deallocated, and then occasionally there's one that has like an empty status, and so that's what the IIF is for. If it's empty, we say VM state unknown, and that would be, you know, a VM that we need to go investigate on what's going up with it. Now we have some more complicated examples. This one will get our log analytics workspaces, and then it will find the solutions that are installed on top of our log analytics workspaces. Like I mentioned earlier, Azure Sentinel and Azure Security Center aren't actual resources. If you try and go looking at types for those, you're not going to find them. And so this one does a join with our operations management solutions with our log analytics workspaces. And typically when we're doing joins in Azure Resource Graph, we want to use left outer because you don't want to assume that one table has, you know, one-to-one relationship, right? Like just the same thing with the VMs. It can have multiple NICs and it can have multiple disks. So using left outer will get you all the information on both tables. It won't eliminate any information by using the inner unique join. So we'll run that. And then you can see our log analytics workspaces with the formatted results. It shows us, you know, which workspaces have Security Center free, I believe is the second one. Yeah. And then Azure Sentinel. I've done this for basically all of the most common solutions you'd find out there. Azure Monitor for VMs, Azure Monitor for containers, Azure Automation, the change tracking solution, and the update management solution. So this might look a little more complicated than it is, but basically it's all in this, the logic, whether or not a machine, the log analytics workspace has that solution installed. Since it's letting me query VMs again, I'll show you in this query how to join your VM with its OS disk and its NIC. And again, this looks a little complicated, but if you break it out, this first part, we query our virtual machine, and then we extend the OS disk ID because we're going to join our disk to the VM. And so that's a very small query. And then the second query is where we get the OS disk, and we're getting disks where they're not attached because we don't want any unattached disks. And then we only want the OS type disk. So it has that property in there where it says this is an OS type, or it's not, it doesn't have it, it's like a data disk. And then the last line, we simply dig in and get the OS type, the SKU, the disk size in gigabytes, and then the OS disk ID, which is what we join it on. And then the next part is where we get our NICs. We extend the array length. We get the length of the network profile network interfaces property, and then we expand it with NVExpand. And then we only want the primary NIC. And then we extend some new properties here to get some other information. And then when we run it all, we get the OS disk, the OS SKU, the VM size, our private IP. If it has a public IP, it'll show the ID here, like this one has it. And again, this is an example of using the left outer, all right? Because if we did an inner unique join with the public IP, it would only show us the virtual machines that have a public IP ID on them. And then I like to include the rest of the properties just in case you want to, if there's any other properties you want to grab from here, you could add to the query if you wanted to. And this is where it told me my queries was too long, so I have a second one here. And this query, again, it looks a little more complicated than it is. We're grabbing our virtual machines, and then we extend VM ID, and we cast it to lower so that it will match whatever is on the other end. And then we get the OS disk just to have it. And then this first query, we get our disks. It's just the same as the last query, but this second part is we get our availability sets. So the availability sets are their own resource type, but there's very few properties in there, and you can just grab all of them, which is what I do in this section here after we do the NVExpand on it. So we grab the VM ID and cast it to lower so it matches the other table. And then we grab the platform update count, and then the the update domain count and the fault domain count. And that's what's important from availability sets, because that tells you, what's going to happen if a machine or some sort of availability happens with updates or a fault. And then similarly, SQL virtual machines is also an extension property that you can grab. And then we grab that and get the SQL Servant's license type, the image, all of that important information under properties, and then join it back up to the table, the other tables. Are we back to not running queries again?
Billy, hey, it's me. Somebody in the chat has suggested if the query is not running, you could try using the rc.portal.azure.com.
I'm not aware of that. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, I mean, I've never run into these issues where it just doesn't run. I was playing with these all last night, making sure they worked, and everything was fine. So that brought us back our VMs. Again, it's a left outer, right? So we're grabbing VMs whether or not they have an availability set or a SQL ID. So you can see this one has an availability set, and if we scroll to the right, we have our fault domain count and our update domain count. And then some shorter practical examples. We can find orphaned resources. With this one, we're going to grab our disks, and then we're going to grab unattached or otherwise empty disks, like where the managed by is empty. And this will return back our orphan disks that we might want to clean up, because you do still get charged for disks that are not attached. Similarly, we can grab empty availability sets. We grab the availability set type, and then we just we do the array length on the virtual machines, and where it's 0, that means it's empty. And so you can see we have 3 availability sets out there that have no virtual machines. And then the last one, we can find orphan NICs, and shout out to community mentor James, I think is Dumont. I had set up this query and I'd never used, the environment I had didn't have private endpoints, and he's like, hey, you know, we need to add the private endpoints. And so he modified the query, and now it checks for private endpoints, because apparently you can have a network interface with a private endpoint, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has a virtual machine next to it. So we do a left outer join on that and then check against the private endpoints. And you can see we have a handful of NICs that need to get cleaned up. So with that, those are my queries. Once you have all those queries, you know, someone or at some point, someone's going to say, hey, can we run a report or create a dashboard for these resources? So I have created an Azure inventory dashboard. This is out on my GitHub. Link to it is in the slides. And this is all, it's like 99% Azure Resource Graph. And so we have this overview tab where it gives us a count of all our resources. The subscription parameter runs against every query, so we can use all of those, or if we just select one, it'll run against and change the queries. So then we get an overview by resource type. And I've translated these from the resource provider names to their actual service names. It's a best effort. I'm, you know, not an expert on everything. So if you see someone that's named wrong, you know, do a pull request on my, you know, workbook and let's fix it. You know, I use all the same queries. We've got the compute where we're running against deallocated, running in VM state unknown. And I recently added, you know, VM scale sets here. The VM overview tab is the availability set query I just showed you. And let's expand, yeah, get rid of that one. This subscription just showed up for me for some reason. And so the Contoso Hotels production, you know, it has some availability sets and some SQL machines in there. And so this gives you an inventory of most of your Azure environment. Is it 100%? I don't think so, but I did just add some more to the paths between containers showing ACRs, Kubernetes, and container instances. And then I added IoT, machine learning, and AI, and then Windows Virtual Desktop tabs in here. And then one other thing I want to show you is just the log analytics is that same query, but we can make it a little bit prettier in workbooks with icons, you know, showing not enabled versus enabled. And then one of the cool things they just recently added is to query security. So you can add your security score. This is direct from Security Center, and it breaks it down by subscription, and it breaks it down by resource type, or the actual like recommendations in Security Center. And with that, let me go back to PowerPoint, and these are the resources. The official docs, the markdown that I used with these queries is on my GitHub, and then I just have a general Azure Resource Graph GitHub, and then the inventory workbook, and then general KQL resources and learning material. And so with that, I'm ready to take any questions if there is any.
Yep, awesome. Thanks, Billy. There are a couple of questions. Let me read them out. Okay, so the first one is, can you also combine cost data with these queries?
I don't think so. Hold on, let me pull that back up.
Yeah, I think the question, you know, it refers to the query that you were running where you joined the virtual machines with their disks and NICs and such, right? So can you like calculate the cost of all that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a table in here. You've got the advisor resources. Yeah, I don't think you can, at least in Resource Graph. I have seen, and I just got this working the other day, in workbooks, you can query cost management. And so you could actually join that, those VMs up with querying cost management directly in the workbook.
That's good to know. So how do you query cost management? Is that still using KQL?
No, it's a JSON body request. In workbooks, they added the ability to query ARM directly, and so you just query the cost management API in ARM.
Oh, okay. Nice. That's good to know. Okay, the next one we have is, so all these queries that you are running, are they tenant level, or can you also have them like subscription level, resource group level, and so on?
Yeah, so they're all subscription level. Like I said, it supports Lighthouse. It supports cross subscription and multi-subscription queries. All those queries I was just running were running against 30 different subscriptions. And so in Lighthouse, you'd have the different tenants, but as long as you have the reader access to the subscriptions, you should be able to query them.
Right, perfect. That actually was a follow-up question as to, does this also work with multi-tenant queries?
Yeah, it should. As long as you have that access in Lighthouse, it should.
Right. Okay, cool. There's one more, but I think that is more directed towards us, which is to where can I get the slides from? So the slides will be sent to you on the in the follow-up email along with the recording. So you will have access to the recording as well as the slides. Awesome. So that's all the questions. Unless you have anything more to add, Billy, I think we can conclude it at this point.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks everyone for attending.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending. This is the last part of this series. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. All the recordings and slides should be available to you as the follow-up emails. And I hope you guys join us in the upcoming series as well. Thank you so much.